In other videos, I've talked about DNA evidence that shows some Middle Eastern ancestry in Native Americans. And that evidence was on the mitochondrial DNA side. So that is matrilineal testing. What that means is it's the pass from the mothers through their daughters, generally referred to as haplogroup X DNA. So that DNA type passed down from mothers through daughters in Native Americans. It shows a partial connection to the Middle East for Native American ancestry. In this video, I'm going to look at the Y-chromosome DNA passed down from fathers through sons down the patrilineal line. It's a different type of DNA testing, but what I'll show is that also supports the Book of Mormon and also shows a partial ancestry for Native Americans that fits the Book of Mormon. Now, this is discussed in detail in my book, Face of a Nephite. A link for that book will be in the description for this video below. To present this information, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. All right, so the slide, the graphic that I put on the screen there for you, this is for that haplogroup X DNA that I was talking about and had described in more detail in different videos. And what this world map does is it shows the locations with the highest concentrations of this DNA type. And this is of indigenous populations. So what this map shows was that the highest populations for haplogroup X in the world are with Native Americans in Northeast North America and also in the Middle East. And so it shows this sort of Israelite Native American connection that fits with the Book of Mormon. Like I said, I have other videos that go into haplogroup X in greater detail. Now in this video, we're going to talk about, in particular, one of the DNA types that they found in doing the Y chromosome testing of Native Americans called Y-DNA haplogroup R. When they did the testing of Native Americans for the Y chromosome DNA, most Native Americans throughout the Americas test with what is called haplogroup Q. There are also some that test with a haplogroup C. But they, in addition to the dominant Q and additional with the haplogroup C, they found a lot of Native Americans, a very high percentage, particularly among Algonquin tribes, that had a Y-DNA haplogroup R, in particular Y-DNA haplogroup R1b. And this was confusing and a surprise for them because Y-DNA haplogroup R, particularly R1b, is generally considered more of a Caucasian, Western European DNA type. R1b, the highest concentration is over there. Other types of Y-DNA R are in the Central and Western Asia, also up in Russia, in the Middle East, and in certain locations, but it is not an Eastern Asian DNA type. So it does not fit the idea of a Siberian, migration across the Bering land bridge for this DNA type. So it was considered, well, this must have come since Columbus. It must be just a Western European mixture that would seem to be the fit with the R1b DNA type. Although the percentages that they found in the Americas were much too high for that possibility. I should note that also a significant percentage of Navajo and Apache have this as well. And it's found elsewhere in the Americas as well, but the highest concentrations are in this Northeast Native Americans, in particular among the Algonquin tribes. And so, for example, the Ojibwa, also called the Chippewa, that tribe, as many as 70, almost 80% of the men have this Y chromosome DNA haplogroup R1b. And this is of people when they do this, they're doing DNA testing for the tribe. So when they do the testing, they look for people with pure ancestry. So these were people in the tribe who claim a pure ancestry, a Native American ancestry, and the majority of them are coming up with this DNA type. And so I think, people who know the people in those tribes, it doesn't make sense to say that the majority would have come, that this DNA all came post-Columbus, and that the majority of the men actually have, on the patrilineal side, European forefathers. It just doesn't make sense. So there are some who have said, well, maybe this is ancient, but that is, an unpopular opinion. But we'll look at some of the peer-reviewed literature that points that direction. First, let's go ahead and talk about the possible Book of Mormon connection. So the first question is this a possible Book of Mormon type DNA? Is this a possible DNA type that would relate to Hebrew people, Josephite type people? Well, the answer is yes. So first, when you look at, who we have for the tribe of, the tribes of Israel, the Jewish people, a significant percentage of Jewish men do have this DNA type. So when they've tested Israeli populations, 10 to 30% have this DNA type. When they look at Ashkenazi Sephardic Jews around the world, a high percentage of them have this DNA type. So it is associated with Hebrew Jewish populations as well. In addition, it is also a plausible Y-DNA type, Y-chromosome DNA type for Lehi's party or for the Mulekites, because it has been shown to have been present in prior to Lehi's time frame in places that he would have had access to or could have possible partial ancestry from. For example, King Tut, King Tutankhamun, when they did DNA testing for him, he was tested as Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, which is the same DNA type that's found in the Native Americans, and this was a surprise. Now, King Tut was in the 1300s BC, so historically this would have been after Joseph of Egypt, and the Israelites were there in Egypt, and then prior to Lehi. So it's a very plausible Y chromosome DNA type to have been passed down and exist among the Israelites in Lehi's time frame. Okay, so it's a plausible DNA type that relates to the Book of Mormon. Is it ancient? Now there's a couple of ways that we can look and test and kind of figure out whether this is ancient or not. And one way would be if testing of an ancient Native American skeleton came up with that DNA. That has not happened yet. But another way that you can look at it is both look at the high frequency and then also look at whether this DNA among Native Americans has mutated and has had time to mutate. And you can also look at whether, so if this all came post-Columbus, and if the majority, of Native Americans really have this DNA that's post-Columbus, then you shouldn't just be seeing this haplogroup R1b. You should also be seeing similar type percentages that you would get in Europe, in Western Europe, for all these other European type DNA types that should also be showing up among the Algonquins as well. In other words, if you really did have this much intermixing to basically end up dominating the Algonquin DNA, you should see all types of other European DNA types also showing up. And so in looking at that, and I'll point to a couple of peer-reviewed journals that look at that, and looking at the answer is that it looks ancient. So this first one, this was in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 2003. They were, in this particular study, they were looking at the Chippewayan tribe, which is an Algonquin tribe. They found this Y-DNA haplogroup R in 63% of the Chippewayan men, again, who are claiming pure native ancestry. They said that makes it really unlikely that all of this comes from just recent European admixture. So they said this high level, as I just said, it would be likely to introduce other lineages that are common in Europe. These were not observed. This looks like it's the result of that it's ancient, and it does that it's not the result of recent admixture with Europeans. Now, in doing the DNA testing, they do see some of the other European lineages and European types that are produced, but not nearly to the percentage that you're seeing with haplogroup Y-DNA R1b. And it's on the order of like 10 times or more. So for example, with Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, you'll see the majority of the Native American men in these Algonquin groups have this DNA type. The percentage that have other relatively common Y-chromosome DNA types in Western Europe, you're seeing very, very, very small percentage, maybe 1 to 5% or less, that kind of thing. And so it points to this Y-DNA R1b DNA being ancient, not recent. Okay, another, this is a good quote this was in the World Archaeology in 2014. They again looked at the unusually high Y-DNA R1b, this DNA frequency with the Northeast Native Americans. And then they also talked about the additional mutations and things that they were seeing with the Native American DNA testing. And they said, there's a substantial portion of these Native Americans with this DNA type that are having mutations that are creating these, they called them STR haplotypes. And they have mutations that were not shared with other Europeans that were unique to the Native Americans. They said that would not be expected if these were from recent European introductions. So it pointed to them that it was from ancient founders and should be considered an ancient lineage for the Native Americans. And then a third peer-reviewed one. This one was by an individual. In this one, they actually point to and conclude that they think it was from Europe, but the data, when you look at the data in one of their key charts, they're sort of doing a genetic chart looking at the mutations they found of the individuals in these Native American tribes that they were testing. And so of the 62 DNA types that were found in these Native Americans, he said of the 62, 43 of them did exist in Europe as well, but the rest were all at least one mutational step away from anything that was found in Europe. And 5 of them, in fact, were several mutational steps, 4 to 8 mutational steps away from European haplotypes. And so logically, this just points to the fact that this is not just recent European DNA mixed in with Native Americans, but instead this is an authentic ancient Native American DNA type that has been around in the Americas and is a legitimate founding. So it's consistent with the Book of Mormon's account of migrations, from ancestors that plausibly could have had this DNA type that came here. There's one other thing that also points to this DNA type as being an ancient DNA type, and that is that its distribution is the same with haplogroup X. So this haplogroup X, this Middle Eastern DNA type that was on the mother side. In testing the father's side, they find that this DNA type is in the same populations and kind of in the similar distributions of what you had with haplogroup X, which points to them being populations that were common and came over together. So in this slide on the left, you'll see this is the mitochondrial DNA haplogroup X and the distribution among Native Americans. On the right, it's the Y DNA, patrilineal line Y DNA haplogroup R, and its distribution among Native Americans. And you'll notice that they're like almost the same, very similar to each other. So when you step back and you think, okay, the common statement, the common rebuttal for haplogroup X on the left, so they say that haplogroup X stuff that may have originated in the Middle East. Middle East may be the closest relative for the Native Americans, but they say that haplogroup X, we think, came long before the Book of Mormon. So they're saying this is too old for the Book of Mormon. But then on the Y DNA haplogroup R, they say, well, this is too new for the Book of Mormon. This is only since Columbus. So they say that haplogroup X is too old. The Y DNA haplogroup R is too new for the Book of Mormon. But when you put them side to side and realize these are identifying the same populations and likely a common migration, common ancestral group that lived and spread together, it points to the fact that both of those conclusions are wrong. And in fact, it's consistent with a Book of Mormon type account of a Middle Eastern ancestry and another plausible Middle Eastern type ancestry here coming together, not across a Bering Strait, but coming across the ocean and spreading here together among the Native Americans anciently. Okay, so I just a closing point. I've talked about Y DNA haplogroup R. As I said, the dominant in the rest of America is the dominant haplogroup type, common DNA type on the patrilineal side is Q. Well, it turns out with Q that there's a couple of subdivisions of that. And one of the subdivisions of that DNA, haplogroup Q DNA, actually went and stayed and goes with the haplogroup R DNA. And similarly, on the female, the mitochondrial DNA side, mitochondrial DNA C, which is one of the other DNA types, one of the subtypes of that also goes with haplogroup X. And so this is just mentioned in a more recent peer-reviewed article. This is here in this article from 2019. And what they found is that it's not just X and R, but there's also two other DNA types that they find. On the Y DNA side, it's Q, a subtype of Q, called Y4276 here. And then a subtype of the mitochondrial DNA C, called C4C. And what they found is that the distribution of those is paralleling what they found for haplogroup X, and recognizing that this may mean that they came over together in a migration. And they also note that again, that it seems to be associated in particular with subjects speaking the Algonquin language. Okay, so that wraps up that information. In sum, the DNA evidence shows again that the Native Americans, particularly in the Heartland, have a DNA type that overlaps with the rest of the Americas, but also has some distinctive ancestry. And it points a little bit more towards the Heartland type geographic model for the Book of Mormon, but does support the Book of Mormon. Okay, so that's what the Y DNA evidence shows. We've now looked at three different types, all three types of DNA testing. On the mitochondrial, the matrilineal line, that DNA testing showed a connection with the Middle East with with a haplogroup X DNA. We also took a look at autosomal DNA, where they sort of take a panorama of the DNA, and we pointed out that shows a partial Mediterranean, potentially Middle Eastern type ancestry that was higher than expected, and particularly for the Algonquin groups, but for all of the Native Americans throughout all of the Americas, they're showing a little higher percentage than what they were expecting of a potential Mediterranean type, Middle Eastern, potentially Jewish uh, uh, or Hebrew type DNA. And then in this one, we talked about the patrilineal side, the Y chromosome DNA, which in my view, the peer-reviewed literature does support an ancestry there, again, pointing that it's not just a migration from Asia across the Bering Strait, the typical formulation, but that there's a partial ancestry that came from elsewhere and is consistent with the Book of Mormon. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them below. Again, encourage you to like and subscribe and hit the notifications button so that you can receive these videos and share them with others. Thank you.